Hello, I'm David from Winning Solutions, and today I'm going to give a presentation on split databases. So you may have heard this term a lot and may be wondering what it is, or maybe you haven't heard the term before. Here at Winning Solutions, we specialize in access databases, and so if we're working on a database for you, this term may very well come up. So what I'm going to do here is just give you a quick tutorial on what a split database is and why we should use it. So let's define what a split database is first. When you open up Access and create a new database, you create tables, and then from that table you create queries to view the data, you create forms and reports as a user interface. The forms, the forms are where all the buttons and drop-down boxes and text boxes and all that. And of course reports. So that's the user interface of the database. So basically, when we split the database, what we're doing is we're taking the tables and put those in one file, and we call that the back end. And then we take everything else, in other words, the forms, the reports, everything else, we call that the front end. We put that in a separate file. And the back end can be an Access database, and there are other options too, but let's just start with the back end being an Access database for now. So you may be wondering, why split the database? And first of all, let's take a look at a typical database that we might have. So here we have just a very basic database that we've created. We have two tables. These were created here in Access, and you can see by the grid icon, the Excel grid-like icon, these are local tables, meaning they exist as part of the database. And that's one of the things that makes Access very convenient and very easy to work with, because everything is self-contained. You have this one database file, it's got all the data, it's got all the forms, it's got all the reports, everything's in one nice package, which sounds really nice, and it is if you are the only person using that database. As soon as another person starts using it, or more specifically, it starts being used on another computer, namely, two people using it, or two people using it at once, or using it on different computers, then you start running into problems. So we have a form here that, again, the design of the form is not really important, but what is important is this is how we interface with the data. So this is what we would call the user interface. If these were in a separate file, this is what we would consider the back end. Okay, so we scroll through the customers and people table, and we see each of them has an order and a total. Okay, so that's how you might typically see a typical database file. But of course, this has problems when it comes to multiple users and if maintenance needs to be done on the database. So let's take that example where we have the self-contained database. Let's say we have this one right here, and it gets copied to two other computers. And so we have three users here, three users in a people table. Now you notice this user over here, the user on computer number 3, changed person number 2, or a person ID 2, from Jill to Steve. Now here's the problem. Steve only exists on this copy of the data. These two copies are out of date, or actually maybe Jill is correct and this change was made in error. The important thing is now we have inconsistency. What splitting does, we have an alternate diagram here for splitting. Now the back end is here. The back end is in one centralized location, and here on two other computers. This might be on one computer. This is a second and third. So this is a server. These are two user computers. They have just the forms and reports, and they can access this table remotely. You don't have to have a separate copy on every machine. You have one centralized copy. So if this person changes Jill to Steve, this person will also see it. Let's see what that looks like in Access. So this is what the front end of a split database would look like. Now, it looks the same, basically. You still have the tables, you still have that form that you can use to scroll through information. Now the difference here is that you see this little arrow in front of the orders and people's table. That arrow means that this is not that this data is not local to this file. The data is not part of this database file. In other words, this is what we call a linked table. So if we kind of hover over it, you can see that it has the back end. This is pointing to the back end, and the back end is here. You see, we just have the table, but these tables are being referenced here. This is a point that these are simply pointing to that back end table. You can think of it as a link, as a hyperlink to a website, right? The website itself, all the files and stuff that make up the web page itself is here. Whereas this is the web browser. We're simply linking to these tables, but we can use them as though they're local. So that's basically what splitting a database does. Here's the original. Now we take everything except the tables and remove them. We call that file the backend. We leave everything else, just the queries and forms, and if there were reports, they'd be in here too. Those form the front end. And again, these tables aren't really here. They're just links to tables in the other files. So the database is now split. So there's one common copy of the data, and so you don't have everyone with their own copy making their own inconsistent changes. Of course, the other advantage is that if work needs to be done on the database, let's suppose work needs to be done, an update needs to be done on the front end of the application. Well, that's fine. The developer can get their own copy of this, so they can still, all the current users can still use the database while the front end is being worked on. The only exception is that no changes, if the database maintenance involves changes to the table itself, not to the data. The data is fine. We can add and remove data. But if a table has to be added, if we had to add a column to this table or change data types, whatever, that is a case where people would have to be not using the database in the meantime, because this is kind of that centralized location. But any changes made to forms or reports, or simply adding, removing, and editing data can be done without disturbing existing users, and that's the main point. Now, I mentioned one option is that where the back end is another access file. Well, access has its limitations, both in terms of database size and speed, and so there are server solutions such as SQL Server. There are others such as Oracle. Bottom line is SQL Server is, and I'm going to oversimplify this a little bit and butcher the definition in the process, but SQL Server, it's a process running on some third computer, running on a server computer that basically houses the tables. The tables reside within the SQL Server. I'm only covering about 2% of what SQL Server is, but it'll do for our purposes. Okay, so the tables are similar to the front end we saw earlier. The only difference is the table icon has been replaced by this globe. So this arrow pointing to the globe means that these are linked tables. They're not actually in this database, but they're also on a remote server, such as SQL Server or something else. So this can apply to Oracle or other back-end solutions as well. But SQL Server is a back-end by itself. It does not have any interface. We still use access for the application itself, for the interface, and that is the idea of splitting databases. So to conclude, the advantages: you can have multiple users. It keeps the data and the application separate, which is great for maintenance. The users can continue working in the existing front end while it's being modified, because the new front end is just going to plug back into the same data when it comes back, and it'll all be seamlessly. Every user gets their own copy of the front end of the application, but there's a common back end or table so that everyone always has the same data. So hopefully this clears up what a split database is and why it's useful and why we recommend it in almost every situation. Okay, thanks for watching, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos like this, and enjoy the rest of your day.